On today's World Insight, China transitions from battling the virus within to keeping the virus out. How will China prevent a second wave?
In Wuhan, lots of people actually they have the immunity already. We should do more study for them.
And China and India are the two most populous countries in the world. How will the two Asian giants fight the coronavirus together?
It's not only important for countries to put aside differences, it is important to rise above those differences.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today's program once again with the ongoing global battle against the COVID-19. According to the World Health Organization, by Sunday, global cases of novel coronavirus grew by more than 80,000 and fatalities rose by nearly 6,000. The latest epicenter, the United States, President Donald Trump said the week ahead will probably be the toughest. In Europe, experts say signs of hope are emerging as Italy reported its lowest single-day deaths in nearly 3 weeks, and Spain saw continued declines in new cases and deaths. Here in China, the mainland reported 38 new imported cases on Sunday. What is China's strategy in the next phase of the fight? Earlier, I had an in-depth interview with Professor Zhang Wenhong, who is the head of the Center for Infectious Diseases at the Huashan Hospital of Fudan University in Shanghai. He's also the leader of Shanghai's anti-COVID-19 clinical expert team. Let's listen to what his assessment is. Dr. Zhang, I heard you've been telling people that people should enjoy more steaks, eggs, milk as much as possible because they need to survive and thrive even with the pandemic. Is it true?
在目前的疫情期间
Under the current pandemic, many of our friends have returned from overseas, but it has been difficult to fly into China because many flights have been grounded. Unfortunately, some of the people returning from overseas have already been infected. In our analysis of these infected people, I found that those who are prone to suffering from severe symptoms are mainly those with nutritional deficiencies.
跟营养的缺乏有关系。
Many of these people returning from abroad never encountered food shortages, so why did these deficiencies arise? The cause is travel fatigue.
因为旅途的劳累。
During the journey, to best protect themselves, they avoided eating or taking off their masks. So I would like to advise all those traveling to maintain a healthy diet to resist the virus. There is a correlation between the quality of nutrition intake and the speed of disease progression. Especially during the journey back home, nutrition is critical. So I would advise my friends returning to China to eat some steaks before the trip.
出来之前最好在家里先吃2块牛排，把自己的蛋白质补充的比较充分。
Getting their fill of steaks so they will be safer on the road. This safety translates to better resistance because you have more protein to boost your immunity.
Besides steaks and milk, what do you think are some of the most important things we need to do now here in China for the prevention and control?
在中国已经度过了一个非常黑暗的时期，也就是说
China has come out of a very dark period. At present, there are basically no local cases in China. Many cases are imported. In other words, China has now transitioned to the second phase. In the second phase of prevention and control, our approach is mainly to prevent imported cases. The number of imported cases may not necessarily be large, but there is a difference between the second and the first phase.
是跟第一阶段出现了一个不同的一个差异点。
The difference is that there are some people who have been infected with the virus among the people returning to China. Their symptoms are relatively mild, and others are exposed to these cases are at risk of infection. So we have several requirements.
第一个，从国家的层面
First, on the national level, at customs there are sufficient barriers for imported cases. These techniques include virus screening and quarantining travelers for a limited period of time. For the general public in the second phase, the people are still in the epidemic period, So we must maintain good hygiene habits which are developed during the first phase. That means we still have to maintain a proper social distance. Masks should still be worn in places where people gather. We also need to wash our hands frequently.
尽量还是可以戴口罩，还有勤洗手。
I believe that by doing these three things well, we can prevent the second wave of the coronavirus epidemic.
Professor Zhang, one of the things people have been asking, especially from outside China, what exactly are the Chinese ways, or is the Chinese way? But many of us who are here in this country know there's no just one single Chinese way of dealing with COVID-19, but various practices. How would you compare, for example, where you are, Shanghai, with the city of Wuhan?
这个问题其实问得非常关键。
This question is actually very critical. Earlier, I participated in a dialogue with scientists from various countries. We also discussed some related issues together. Participants in the dialogue included scientists and doctors from Asian countries such as China, Japan, and South Korea, as well as scientists from the United States, including the famous American virologist David Ho.
当中我就分享了中国的经验。其实中国的经验。
During the dialogue, I shared China's experience. In fact, China's experience cannot be replicated. Take Wuhan and Shanghai, for instance. Both cities are in China, but they have different circumstances.
情况下面，我们采取的方式完全是不同的。
The harsher measures taken by Wuhan were because it was the epicenter in China at that time. The center of the outbreak in the United States is now mainly New York. At areas where the overall number of local transmissions are low, they will have different prevention and control measures that focus on keeping out imported cases. The so-called scientific strategy for the epidemic prevention is calculated based on local conditions, like the habits of the people and the medical facilities.
我们武汉采取的就是 lockdown。为什么要 lockdown？lockdown 就是说这是整个中国的 epicenter。
The lockdown of Wuhan was because it was the center of the outbreak, and there were a large number of cases exported. Therefore, the complete closure of the city at the time would play a very effective role in the national epidemic control, and it would have a great significance for China and the world. This greatly reduced the number of imported cases in Shanghai. After the import ratio has been greatly reduced, Shanghai's prevention and control does not require a lockdown.
上海的防控就不是 lockdown， 我们是 slow down， 甚至于 shut down 都谈不上。
The measures at the time in Shanghai were a slowdown, not even a shutdown. So what does a slowdown mean? We just slowed down the pace of life.
尽量的 stay at home， 尽量的待在家里。
We suggested people stay at home as much as possible, wear masks when going out, wash hands frequently, and maintain social distance. Some entertainment and leisure places, such as restaurants, temporarily closed, but supermarkets, hospitals, banks, and other essential businesses remained
公
open.
共的交通给限制掉了。所以在这种情况下面，对于一个城市的 slow down， 对于
We only restrict public transportation. So in this case, this can slow down a place where the number of cases is not very big, and the local economy and people's lives are not greatly affected. This is somewhat similar to the current epidemic prevention methods adopted by Hong Kong, Singapore, and other places. It blocks the import-type ratio. People's daily grind slows down. If the epidemic flares up, it may have to transition to a shutdown. If it becomes an epidemic center, it may require a lockdown.
成为一个 epicenter， 我们可能就需要 lockdown。
So, Professor Zhang, what you said is extremely interesting to me because there's one ultimate question, that is, how would you judge as to what approach to take? Now, when I ask you that, I'm bearing in mind that you are the head of Shanghai's anti-COVID-19 clinical expert team. In other words, you are providing up-to-date information and analysis to the decision makers. So what are some of the numbers you will have to read and some of the most critical factors you will analyze every time when you provide the suggestion, whether it is quote-unquote a lockdown or a slowdown or something else? What about now?
事实上呢，就是我们在疫情的一个发展过程当中。
In fact, there will be some clues during the development of the epidemic. From the perspective of a city like Shanghai, the first phase in the development of the epidemic is imported cases.
如果 imported cases， 我们也就是输入性的一个病例。
At this time, If you can effectively prevent and control imported cases, it will be very successful. However, there may be negligence in the process of this phase. This negligence means that you have guarded the gate, but the small door is unguarded. Like the United States, China was blocked, but it did not notice the cases from European countries. Then came the second phase, and the outbreak in the U.S. suddenly boomed. At this point, the second phase of the outbreak is imminent.
我们给你一个提示，我们得升级，我们得 upgrade， 我们得。
A stricter prevention and control strategy than before is necessary. It is also very difficult.
我们要对所有的 imported cases 进行 tracing， 我们进行追踪。你如果追踪得到
Because we need to track all imported cases. If it cannot be traced, the epidemic will spread further in the community, or even spread among communities.
另外一个小区里面。
The number of cases will climb slowly at the early stage, and more cases will be difficult to trace later.
到越来越多的它的 cases 你找不到，这个时候我们对整个城市采取的策略就是逐渐的从 slow down 要过渡到 shut down。所以现在
At this time, our strategy for the entire city is to gradually transition from slowdown to shutdown. Most countries now adopt shutdown, and even the requirements in some areas are more stringent. For example, in Hong Kong, it is illegal for more than 4 people to eat out together. In Shanghai, we tracked all the imported cases to understand who was in close contact with each case. Luckily, there were no 3rd generation and 4th generation infection cases. I believe that experts from various countries will take corresponding measures according to the situation of their own countries.
我相信各个国家的流行病学专家也根据自己国家的一个情况，会采取相应的 response。
Our exclusive interview with Zhang Wenhong. It's been more than 2 months since Wuhan imposed the lockdown. All public transportation was suspended, commercial flights halted, and residents were urged not to leave their homes. As the lockdown is soon to be lifted and public daily activities return to normal, or at least somewhat normal, many people are concerned about one issue: Wuhan residents' level of immunity. Do they have stronger immune system compared to the people from the rest of the country and the rest of the world regarding COVID-19? I asked that question to Dr. Zhang Wenhong. Wuhan has been locked down for quite some time.
Yes.
It's likely to be open very soon.
Yes.
However, after a city which is the epicenter,
Yes.
with the cases percentage so high and death rate reaching certain extent, what would that mean when people there have been locked down for quite some time? Would the people as a group develop certain kinds of immunity among themselves compared to the other parts of China, compared to the other parts of the world?
Yes, that's right. I think this is really a very crucial question, and I think maybe 1 month ago that the Prime Minister from the United Kingdom, he mentioned about the herd immunity. Is that right? Actually, if a city or a country have the herd immunity, really I think it will be a disaster for the population there. However, when emerging infectious disease, I think sometimes it can not be speculated than we met before. However, I think in Wuhan and something similarly in Italy, we found that lots of patients were infected by the novel virus. And I think if a lot of population infected with this virus, actually they would acquire the immunity. So the herd immunity actually was forced to be set up. So therefore, I think in China, the only city that with the highest immunity, it would be Wuhan. So after a long time, I think the Wuhan may be the most safest city in China. So therefore, I think I can imagine that the Wuhan, lots of people actually they have the immunity already. However, I think this is a scientific question. We should do more study for that. Fortunately, some of my colleagues in Wuhan city, they have designed some study to do that. They can do the several epidemiology study for that. Maybe several weeks later, we can get the level of the antibody to the virus. So today, everything is still remain to be answered.
But then what does that mean for the rest of the country? And what does that mean for the rest of the world when we are interacting with people coming out of Wuhan, which is a city that had been locked down?
我们在评估这个事情。
We are evaluating this matter. Earlier, I discussed this issue with a German virologist. He had a long history of cooperation with Wuhan. He said that it is difficult for us to judge the degree of herd immunity. But he believes during this epidemic, people in Wuhan have become the most immune group in China. From his point of view, when we are in contact with Wuhan's people, we are in contact with a group of immune people.
他的免疫力最强的一个群体，所以在他看来。
I think that if Wuhan has no new COVID-19 infections, it has no local transmissions. This is the first point. The second point is that the population in this city has the highest immunity against COVID-19. Then the premise of these two scientific assumptions is established. I believe that proving this will be inevitable, and a conclusion should be reached soon.
本土的病例，这个是确切的。
Professor Zhang, one thing, if you look at the chart of the cases in the world, it took about 4 months to have 500,000 cases around the world, but only 1 week when it reached 1 million from 500,000. So what does that say to us, Professor Zhang, for the weeks and probably months ahead for all of us, everybody here in the world?
事实上，经过第一阶段的这个对它的一个。
In fact, according to the chart of the increasing number of COVID-19 cases in the first stage, we can calculate the rate of virus transmission. The data now looks relatively high. We must know that the number of people with influenza may reach tens of millions in the world at a time, which paralyzes many people. Many people say that COVID-19 is a serious flu. The flu can reach tens of millions of cases, and COVID-19 is only 1 million. Why should we be afraid of it? But now everyone recognizes that 1 million coronavirus cases and tens of millions of influenza cases can be comparable. The mortality rate of COVID-19 is higher than that of influenza. This 1 million has shocked the world, which can be seen from the current economic malaise across the world.
来讲的风险具有可比性，所以这个病的100万，事实上已经让世界已经吓得了有点发抖。
In the early 1 or 2 months, some anti-epidemic methods adopted by many countries were insufficient. The number of confirmed cases has shown an exponential rise during the last 2 weeks. A direct result of this exponential rise is that many countries have taken more active prevention and control measures than before, such as the United States, Italy, and Germany. People in these Western countries have even started to wear masks, though they previously lacked this custom. The death of a large number of patients in the previous stage had made them recognize the difference between this disease and some serious flu in the past.
我现在最担心的是什么呢？这些国家
What I am most worried about is that a pandemic already exists. And what results will this cause? Now we have seen cases start to appear in India and some African countries. Only when there is a more severe epidemic in these areas can we really come to grips with a disaster. I think the situation has become very serious so far. Developed countries and some emerging countries, regardless of their current predicament, should unite to help countries and regions with insufficient medical resources to combat the epidemic. If countries with backward medical resources cannot control the epidemic, even if the epidemic in the United States, Europe, and other places is eventually contained, the global situation will remain bleak. So today, 1 million cases are merely a warning for us to unite. Fortunately, many leaders in the world are responding to the epidemic more actively than before. I think that is a good start.
我想这个是我们迈向良好的一个开端。
You talk about the international cooperation, Professor Zhang, but exactly what you meant. I mean, it sounds like a great word, but what is the content of it, particularly now, urgently?
这里面就涉及到很多方面。
International cooperation includes many aspects. Each country has its own strengths, such as China. Our previous experience in epidemic prevention and treatment is valuable, and our medical-related manufacturing industry is good, such as the production of ventilators. These are our strengths. In terms of science, China has also begun to do some advanced research. Meanwhile, European countries and the United States have always been pioneers in science, so that we can conduct comprehensive cooperation and share information in the fields of vaccine development and new drug research. If the world can cooperate on medical supplies, science, drugs, vaccine, and other aspects, we will be able to control the COVID-19. And we must also be fully prepared for a protracted battle against this disease, because the global anti-epidemic process may be quite long.
但是我们也要有充分的准备，这个道路可能会比较漫长。
What exactly is China's exit strategy, quote unquote? Meaning that the country has managed to keep the number quite low, even though there is still danger of imported and asymptomatic. But what is likely to be the process forward to exit from the higher alert and tension, Professor?
中国事实上在这抗疫的过程当中
China will never withdraw from fighting the epidemic before other countries. As I said before, the control of this global epidemic does not depend on the country with the best control or the earliest control, but on the country with the worst control. If there is one country in the world that does not control the epidemic well, we cannot isolate this country. We should help it control the epidemic. Because of the nature of the virus, it can spread to the whole world from a single uncontrolled spot.
它就会向全世界蔓延。
And now China still faces challenges. One challenge is the same problem faced by other Asian countries. That is, the persistent imported cases. According to the current rate of increase in global cases, this epidemic will be followed wave by wave, and the period may be longer. China will not withdraw from this protracted war against the epidemic, but its combating strategy will be adjusted. China will further promote the resumption of labor when there are very few local cases, and at the same time, strengthen the management of imported cases. During the first step of epidemic control, we have Wuhan's experience in the epidemic outbreak center and Shanghai's experience in dealing with imported cases. The second step of outbreak control in our country will focus on imported cases. It's just that the time for final victory is not in our own hands, but depends on when the epidemic in the world is completely under control.
时间取决于全世界什么时候完全控制疫情。
It is a globalized world, and the virus does not respect the border at all. But we want to thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for helping us to understand the latest and also provide your direct analysis.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Our in-depth interview with Professor Zhang Wenhong. You're watching World Insight, still to come on our program today. China and India are the nations in the world that enjoy the largest populations. How will the two fight against this global pandemic, COVID-19? And what is India's take? I will ask the Indian ambassador to China. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We continue keeping an eye on COVID-19 pandemic. India's death toll rose past 100 on Monday. The total cases reached about 4,000. The world's second most populous country had been under lockdown for about 2 weeks. And on Sunday, in response to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's appeal to show solidarity in the fight against the virus, millions of Indians switched off their lights for 9 minutes. The image of people holding candles and flashlights on their balconies and doorsteps echoes similar displays of unity around the world. Earlier, I spoke to Nikram Misri, India's ambassador to China, about his country's challenges and strategies in combating the virus. Mr. Ambassador, this is a very special year, believe it or not. China and India, 70th anniversary. What do you make of this relationship now?
Well, you're right. It is we are embarking on the 70th anniversary year of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and the People's Republic of China. In fact, just 2 days ago, on the 1st of April, yes, our leaders exchanged letters. The presidents wrote to each other, the premiers wrote to each other, the foreign ministers wrote to each other, greeting the people and the governments and the countries on this very important occasion. I think when talking about this 70th anniversary, while it's no doubt important in itself, one must also keep in mind a slightly larger canvas, and that's the canvas of a relationship not only between the relatively young, I would say, nation states that India and the People's Republic of China represent, but also the millennia-old civilizations that India and China represent. And our canvas, therefore, must necessarily be larger. And when one looks at this large canvas through history, one sees that for the longest time, for the most part, this has been an incredibly close, fruitful and productive relationship, which has been marked by a stunning interchange of ideas, of goods, of people, of technologies, of customs, of religions, in fact. And I think that gives this relationship a very special character. Both countries have found a plethora of measures and institutional mechanisms to engage in a productive way. Not only trade and commerce in a very big way, but cultural exchange and cooperation on issues of international concern like climate change. And also that we have found appropriate mechanisms to even deal with issues where we do not necessarily see eye to eye. Broadly, I would say that in India there is recognition that this is a very important relationship. It's important for us bilaterally. It is important for the region. It is important for the world at large, because at the end of the day, we are talking about 40% of the globe's population, 2.7 billion people.
Exactly.
And I think in recent years we have made good progress in developing various aspects of this relationship. And there are high-level engagements at various levels between the two countries, and I would say that President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have made a unique contribution of their own through the mechanism of the informal summits, the first one in Wuhan and the second one in Chennai just a few months ago. And I think while these two summits have been very useful in terms of their concrete outcomes, the first summit, for instance, institutionalized a high-level meeting between the foreign ministers on cultural exchange and people-to-people relations, which I think are an under-addressed part of our bilateral relationship, and we need to do more on that. And the second summit, in fact, underlined the need to institutionalize a high-level meeting, and this is what was agreed between our leaderships in the economic and commercial fields, so something led by Vice Premier from the Chinese side and by our Finance Minister to discuss issues related to trade and commerce, which are again issues that are very important for the relationship. And I think while these substantive outcomes are important in themselves, what is really important is the underlying common understanding between the two leaders that our differences must not be allowed to turn into disputes. And that's, I think, a good understanding on the basis of which to proceed. I think that we both need to see that there are sensitive issues on both sides. If we respect these sensitivities and conduct ourselves accordingly, I think relations will progress, and they are progressing.
It's quite a comprehensive assessment of the latest situation, Mr. Ambassador. Another latest situation is the global pandemic we're facing now.
Yes.
For a country, a developing country like India with huge population, social distancing would be with quite some challenge. Mr. Ambassador, tell me how your country is trying to practice that and how it works so far. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the solutions you have tested?
As you said, ours is also a large country, an extremely densely populated country. We also have factors such as enormous amount of labor mobility that has happened in recent years as the country has developed economically. And with the onset of these measures of containment, of social distancing, of people not moving around, quarantine and isolation, etc., these aspects have come under a certain amount of pressure. While we also took the same measures that were taken by many other countries in terms of closing schools, closing colleges and universities, educational institutions, cancelling all kinds of events, including religious events, sporting events, major trade events, business conferences, etc. Of course, shutting down almost the entire transportation network except for essential supplies to get from one place to another. But also, I think our leadership realized that eventually what was very important was the fact that people had to be kept where they were. And hence we came with this unprecedented national sort of lockdown, as it were, to have 1.3 billion people, to the extent possible, stay where they were.
Having said that, though, Mr. Ambassador, what do you think are some of the possibilities of comparing notes between China and India, since you're here in China? And what can we exchange our experiences about and cooperate about?
Well, there is a, I would say, medium to long-term aspect for this cooperation, and
let's look at the immediate, and then we go from there.
Yes, of course, very much. There is an immediate aspect to this cooperation as well, and I think the immediate aspect is to lend a hand in terms of helping and assisting the medical fraternity in India right now, since we are now dealing with this crisis on a war footing, practically. To help them in dealing with this. And what they need in order to deal with this crisis is the provision of an enormous amount of medical kits and medical equipment, not just testing kits, but also personal protective equipment for the people who are at the front line, the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the PPE, as they say. And also other medical equipment that is of use, such as ventilators, etc. And I think these are situations that can arise for any country. When China was dealing with this outbreak during the months of January and February, through a process of exchange and interaction, India had provided nearly 16 tons of medical assistance that we flew into Wuhan on one of our aircraft. So there is obviously room for a lot of cooperation. In the present case, of course, what we are doing is we are commercially procuring a lot of this equipment from wherever it is available. China happens to be the country where a lot of this is available. You are one of the largest manufacturers of PPE and ventilators and other such equipment. So I think the immediate priority would be for us to be able to source these in a stable and orderly manner from here, and also for us to keep our freight and cargo lines open so that the material can be transported where it is needed, when it is needed. This, I think, would be what would capture the immediate priority in terms of cooperation between India and China.
And your work these days has a lot to do with every details of this.
It is consumed entirely by this exercise. On a medium to longer term basis, I would say that there is room for India and China to cooperate on the scientific and medical research and development side in the health sector in general, but in this epidemiological side in particular. And I think it would be useful even in the present context for our scientists, for our virologists, for instance, for our national institutes of virology, to be in touch with each other. We could cooperate on issues related to the development of a vaccine, for instance, for this particular virus, or for things that might emerge in the future. I think that scientific research and development collaboration would be of great value, not just to our two countries, but to the world at large, because at the end of the day, we do have very, very large pools of scientific and technological manpower in our two countries.
Right. Last week, the United Nations chief described the pandemic as the most challenging crisis we have faced since the Second World War. The Secretary General called for a coordinated global response to the health threat, with an emphasis on developing nations, reminding countries that we are only as strong as the weakest health system in our interconnected world. Yet, can nations be able to come together to fight against this global pandemic? I asked Ambassador Misri from India about his take. Earlier, there was the very first G20 virtual meeting among the leaders of both developed and developing world, both China and India participating, of course. What do you make of the nature of the outcome, and how do you think they're likely to help us if implemented in an efficient way?
I think given the fact that the G20 countries represent 80% of the global GDP, 60% of global population, more than 90% of the global cases of COVID-19 are in G20 countries, and more than 80% or 85% of the deaths are in G20 countries. There is no other organization that is more, I think, concerned or should be more concerned with this issue than the G20. I think we had good results in terms of the stimulus plan, the undertaking by the leaders to make available up to $5 trillion in order to mitigate the socio-economic costs that have been imposed by this on individuals, on families, on small businesses, on large businesses as well. I think it's useful that there's an understanding also and a commitment to contribute to the WHO-led COVID-19 Solidarity Fund. And I think also there was, coming out of this meeting, an understanding to strengthen the mandate of the WHO itself, to strengthen this organization, that it can be even better prepared in the future to warn the world and warn the international community about these kinds of pandemics.
Mr. Ambassador, of course that would be a very ideal world, but would countries with reality be able to put aside their differences and be able to focus on this global cooperation against COVID-19?
I think it is essential, because the enemy here is not an individual, a country, a group of countries. It is a virus that doesn't discriminate. And I think it's not only important for countries to put aside differences, it is important to rise above those differences in order to combat this, because I think we have to realize that we are all in this together.
What is your daily schedule like, Ms. Ambassador? For me, it's very hard to imagine, because you are dealing with the embassy routine work, while at the same time trying to promote China-India 70th anniversary related events and work, and at the same time dealing with a crisis, a global pandemic crisis. And this place in China, your work is extremely important for your country. So how does that work, Ms. Ambassador?
It all comes together at the end.
I'm glad you have a laughter about this.
The bilateral calendar this year started off on a very high note. There was a visit to China by a very high-ranking military officer from India. The commander of our Northern Command visited China, met with the chief of the PLA forces, visited Chengdu, visited Urumqi, and had very good discussions. And this was in the first week of January. And we had a lot of things on the schedule after that. We observed our National Day on the 23rd of January, which was 3 days ahead of schedule, but we had to do it because the Spring Festival was scheduled to begin on the evening of the 24th of January. Many of our students who were, and other citizens who were in Wuhan and in Hubei and wanted to be repatriated, we had to respond to their concerns at that time, because there were family members in India who were worried about their children. So together with the cooperation that we received from our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China, we were able to operate 3 flights during the month, the end of January and the end of February, over a period of 1 month, to take out the bulk of our citizens from there. In the meantime, of course, we were also in discussions with the Chinese in terms of what kind of assistance we could offer. As I mentioned, we flew in about 15 tons of assistance on an Indian Air Force aircraft in February as our gift to the people of Wuhan and Hubei. And also, I think at the same time, China was procuring other kinds of equipment from India, and we facilitated the procurement of a lot of that equipment as well. Now, of course, we are dealing with the outbreak in India. It's still in its initial stages, but we obviously have to be prepared for the further development of this. And as I said, we are preoccupied 100% right now in meeting the needs of our medical community. And that entails a lot of procurement from India, from China, of various kinds of testing kits, of PPE kits, of ventilators, other kinds of medical equipment. And again, that is something that keeps us busy in terms of engagement not only with the authorities in the Chinese government, but also a very, very large number of companies across China in different fields. There's still some time to go before we can be certain as to when we can actually plan something or have something and start inviting people to it. That necessarily impacts the calendar for India-China at 70, as we call the 70th anniversary celebrations. What we have succeeded in so far is on designing a joint logo to mark these celebrations, and I think that is in the final stages, and we will find an appropriate occasion very soon to jointly release that logo, which will figure on all of the activities that we do. And we had when President Xi and Prime Minister Modi had met in Chennai, they had agreed that the 70th anniversary will be celebrated with 70 activities that will be conducted in both the countries, 35 in India, 35 in China. And
that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but now I don't know that we have enough time left. But as our leaders in the communications that they exchanged just 3 days back, they committed to each other that despite the fact that we have lost time and we may not have time to do everything, we still remain committed to celebrating this occasion with the importance that it deserves, because it is a very, very significant moment for both of us.
Mr. Ambassador, all the best to you and certainly to your beloved ones.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. All the best. And that's all the time we have for today. To find out more, you can always find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook accounts. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now, and be well.